Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where yesterday many of you were alarmed to see the headline that George Miller is suing Warner Brothers for the $7 million he feels he is still owed for Mad Max Fury Road. Why were you alarmed besides the fact that it seems that a creative talent that you admire is not being respected or paid what he's owed? Well, also because that would mean potentially no more Mad Max movies, right? No more George Miller movies for Warner Brothers. Well, the first thing I want to point out is that I think that there weren't going to probably be any more Mad Max movies anyway, because the first one just didn't make enough money to really warrant that. And while it did win a number of Oscars, and everybody was so excited about it, I think one of the reasons everybody was excited when it won all those Oscars was because people, to some degree, fans in particular, who want to see genre fare rewarded, felt it was an Oscar march to the big awards, right? Like maybe Best Picture, Best Director, and it wasn't. So it doesn't have, huge awards to boast. It didn't make enough money at the box office, so they're not going to make any more Mad Max movies. And, George Miller, there was rumors that he was going to do a DC movie. He was going to do a DC movie legitimately at one point. Didn't work. And so I think to some degree George Miller knows that he's not going to be making any movies anytime soon. He's not a particularly prolific filmmaker. So maybe that's one of the reasons he wants that $7 million, no matter how small the amount might be by Hollywood standards. Also, I think it's the principle, and I think considering some of the aspects to the case, he has, in today's environment, he has a pretty good case to get it, that Warner Brothers will probably settle. And that's another reason that you shouldn't be concerned, because as you're going to see with the second story of the day, Warner Brothers gets sued by their collaborators all the time. Ain't nothing new. And they usually settle, as again, I think they will for this George Miller situation. So don't worry about it. But this does provide some interesting insights into the shady reality of studio politics and business. You gotta watch, you gotta watch people. Nobody wants to pay anybody. That's why people have management teams and lawyers so that those people can argue it out, and then the other relationships can still be preserved, right? Let George Miller and George Miller's lawyers and Warner Brothers lawyers get into a big fight, and then they can still all be friends. That's a big part of having representation, particularly in show business. All right, so anyway, let's talk about the George Miller situation, and then we'll get on to the other former lawsuit with Warner Brothers, the Tolkien estate. All right, so George Miller says, Warner Brothers owes me $7 million, and he won the right to have the case argued in Australia, where obviously they're going to be mighty sympathetic to their own person, George Miller. So he said that this $7 million was a bonus that was promised to him and his company if he met a certain net cost for the film. Net cost means, after they take, there's rewards for shooting in Australia, and they have this for a number of locations outside of Hollywood. It's one of the reasons that Los Angeles has lost so much production. So the net cost had to be $157 million, and he didn't make it, says Warner Brothers, so they're keeping their $7 million. Well, George Miller says, well, look, Warner Brothers, you did not inform me of the cost of certain changes that you demanded. So I shouldn't be penalized, George Miller says, for you upping the cost of your own movie. Although I have to argue, I would have to say, as if I were the judge, on this part of the case, it's a two-parter situation. But I'd be like, that's your responsibility, George Miller, to figure this out. I mean, if Warner Brothers snuck something by you, if they weren't legally required to alert you to the additional costs, sucks for you. You'd be more on the ball next time. All right, it's tough out there. All right, but here's where things get a little dicier. So furthermore, his company was supposed to have the right, first dibs on to provide any additional financing for the film. Like, oh my God, we need more money. So who's going to provide it? And don't forget that whoever's paying for the movie, gets a percentage of the earnings of the film, depending on how the agreement is drawn up. It's usually on the actual box office. That's why movies usually never make any money, because all the earnings have been divided up to the investors. So George Miller and his company wanted to have the first right of first refusal to have the big, to keep a bigger piece of the pie, right? But it turns out, at least this is what George Miller is saying in the lawsuit, that Warner Brothers did not give him the right, the first right to provide more financing, and instead went directly behind George Miller and his company's back to get this, wait for it, Rat Pack, Brett Ratner's film finance company, to provide additional financing and therefore a cut of the film's profits, which lends credence to the rumors that Kevin Tsujihara has given preferential treatment to Brett Ratner, hiring his his company in the first place to fund Warner Brothers' slate, even though he was warned against it, as we discussed yesterday. The fact that Gal Gadot is going up against a close friend of the head of the studio. It's very interesting indeed. And this is yet another example of preferential treatment for Brett Ratner and his company at Warner Brothers over other talent. And that doesn't look so good. So I think that alone there is one reason that Warner Brothers, again, and also for just $7 million, might be willing to settle. Fascinating. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day, again, is that Warner Brothers in the past was sued by the Tolkien estate, who felt they were owed $80 million from Lord of the Rings profit participation. And that was eventually settled out of court. And now they're all making a TV show together for Amazon. You know, if there's money to, it's amazing how when there's a lot of money to be made, everybody suddenly gets along. And again, a lot of the bad blood stays between the representation and the legal teams, and and everybody else just remains friends for reasons like this. So yes, the Tolkien estate goes, everybody's got a TV show. Why don't we? And I think that's a valid argument. That's a valid question. So they sent it out, as you've seen all the headlines over the past week or so. They sent out word to all the different streaming services and networks and channels, etc., that they wanted to do a television show, but it wasn't going to be cheap. They wanted a lot of money up front for themselves, and they wanted this not to be a budget show. So Netflix said, okay, we'll give you $100 million, but Amazon said, we'll double that, $200 million. And the Tolkien estate said, going, sold, literally. And Amazon, now they're starting, Netflix used to be the one who threw around the most money, and I guess Amazon said, well, we can do that too. Megan Ellison's going around doing that, and Disney has done that. It's the power of who can write the biggest check. And this is because Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon, has put a mandate down after clean the house, because they had a lot of firings over there recently in their original content division because of sexual harassment allegations. I want a Game of Thrones type hit on the Amazon streaming service, says Jeff Bezos. Free 2-day shipping isn't enough. I want people to feel they should order Amazon Prime to get our amazing television shows. But I have to say that just because of something like that alone, Amazon just doesn't feel like it doesn't have a great image as a content hub, right? Are you really going to watch an amazing television show the same place you get like your tissue for your bathroom, right? Your odds and ends, whatever you're ordering from Amazon. I just feel it doesn't make sense. The only show that I've watched on Amazon, and because I was in desperate need of something to watch, it was like in a weird time when there was nothing available. So someone had recommended to me Sneaky Pete, which was actually quite good. It stars Giovanni Ribisi, and it's also produced by Bryan Cranston, who has a supporting role. Amazing show. But I have to tell you, I haven't been back to Amazon. They just can't get me to go back to watch their shows. And then also, same thing for Hulu with The Handmaid's Tale. It can win all the Emmys at once, and it can be a cultural sensation. Well, I think it's more of a media sensation than a cultural sensation, to be honest with you. And I think, again, that's because people just don't go over there. And I think to the same degree with Transparent. Transparent gets a lot of media attention and a lot of awards because of, the community that it represents for the first time in many ways. But I don't think a lot of people watch Transparent. So I think that it's just hard, there are only so many places I think people are willing to go, and I think that these other places haven't developed a good brand in terms of being content providers. I think it's obviously like HBO and Showtime and traditional television, then also I think Netflix obviously, and Apple. I think Apple has a very good shot at establishing such a brand because so many people watch content there anyway, through iTunes and their Apple TVs. But Amazon, they're paying for it. The Tolkien estate, they're going to go with the money. So they got a multi-season commitment from Amazon, so they don't have to worry about it being canceled after one season, and also the potential for a spin-off even. And these are going to be prequel stories. But what's been an interesting development is that Peter Jackson, as the trades have pointed out, has not been contacted for to contribute to said series. I actually think that's a good idea. Having seen the last few Hobbit movies, I feel that creative well has run dry, and I'd like to see what someone else does with the material. So sorry, Peter Jackson. He's very busy. He's got other stuff to do, and he made so much money off of Lord of the Rings. I think that it's time to bid it adieu. Also, again, as I said, I don't feel there's anything left in the tank with Peter Jackson. Like, oh, he still had stories to tell. I mean, the last Hobbit movie was like super boring. All right, so I told you when I think it was the last one. I remember walking out of the theater and I saw a number of people comparing notes at what point they fell asleep. And actually, that was the same time that I had. Actually, I think it was the second to last one. Basically, when Martin Freeman was, looking for a door in the darkness, I fell asleep. I was like, I'm sure he'll find it and he'll wake me up when he does, and he did. All right, so anyway. Speaking of the small screen, that has become a fantastic launching pad for Reese Witherspoon's new empire, both as an actor and as a producer. Big Little Lies was a huge hit for her, although I think it did more for Nicole Kidman as an actress than it did for Reese Witherspoon. But Reese Witherspoon's going to try again as one of the very first Apple shows, which she's producing and co-starring along with Jennifer Aniston. It's going to be an expose of morning television. We'll see how that works out. Think Gary Shandling show, but for morning TV instead of late night. And now she's producing a movie that I do not believe will star in, but she's producing it along with Zendaya, who will star, and this sounds very good. This is a package that's out right now. Again, packaging. You've heard this term before, but just to remind you, packaging is now something that's done by the by producers and often with the it's done by talent, but often through their agency, which is why you'll see so many people from the same agency in the same package. When the studio system was alive, studios did this themselves, but now it's done mostly by, again, agencies and production companies. So they've put together the star, the producers, the material, this novel called The Gilded Years about Anita Hemmings. We'll talk about the story in just a moment, and they've attached a star, Zendaya, and so it's this seems very good, and I agree. And now they're going to see what distributor is going to bid to provide the budget and to distribute it. So anyway, it's called. They're going to call it A White Lie, which is a much better title. And this is described as a psychological thriller about the true story of Anita Hemmings, a light-skinned black woman and the daughter of a janitor who passed for white to be able to attend Vassar at the turn of the 20th century. And again, Zendaya will star as Anita Hemmings. Fabulous thing. Great idea for a movie, great career move for Zendaya. There's a similar story that was much more salacious, but we'll see how this is approached. But if you've ever seen Imitation of Life, this tackles a similar subject where the maid's daughter tries very hard to pass. That's a little bit more, again, sensationalistic, it's a melodrama, and it's a lot about, I'd be interested to see how the commentary is done here. In Imitation of Life, it's like self-hate and guilt, and how it makes the mother feel, that her daughter's trying to distance herself from her. And here it might be, of course, more outward about, the evils of society, and that Anita Hemmings has to do this in order to receive an education. But anyway, Imitation of Life, both versions are excellent. I highly recommend them, and they're very well regarded. And so I think that's a good tie for this movie in terms of, again, a narrative. Now, I think Zendaya's career is going very well. She looks like one of the best things in The Greatest Showman. That pink wig, that cotton candy pink wig, just can't be doing enough for her. And of course, I thought she did a fabulous job as MJ in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie, and she, of course, will return for the sequel. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about them down below. And let's get to the viewer question, which I thought was just fabulous, talking about, the business of filmmaking. This was a really good opportunity to clarify something that we've been discussing. So let's see here. I Am Unknown Period. Oh, that's a great name. Okay, so I Am Unknown Period says, "Hi Grace, question. You mentioned the Denis Villeneuve being unable to handle the business side of things, because this was yesterday talking about he's a potential director for Bond 25. And I said, after Blade Runner 2049, I wouldn't trust that guy to direct a blockbuster film. Right? So this is what I Am Unknown Period is referencing. I Am Unknown Period says, isn't that the producer's job? To my understanding, directors handle the creative side and the producers handle the business side. For that, why would Blade Runner 2049 be a mark against Denis Villeneuve when he delivered creatively? First time asking a question, don't expect to be picked, surprise, but maybe you can just reply. Thanks. Great question. Very excited to discuss this. So I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think it's a misconception, it's an oversimplification, I think is a better way to describe it, of the duties of a producer and a director. So first of all, you're responsible for making sure that you work again, right? It's particularly difficult for a director who's more prominently associated with a flop. Can you tell me off the top of your head who produced Blade Runner 2049, right? I mean, I know, I'll talk about it in a minute. It did make a little bit more headlines than usual, but that's a little bit easier to hide because because you're not so associated with it. You have a slate of projects. Producers tend to work on more films than a director does, so they're not as closely associated with it. Now, in the Blade Runner 2049 situation, as we have discussed a couple of times, Alcon Entertainment bet big on this movie and will likely go out of business as a result of its failure. So they had a lot riding on it, and so they should have worked a little harder to make sure it was more commercially viable. But anyway, as for Denis Villeneuve, yeah, he's got a lot at stake too, and I think this is a huge hit for him after Arrival, where he was in a much better position for in terms of projects to be offered to him and negotiating and just his standing, right? I mean, I think now, before you'd be like, whatever Denis Villeneuve wants, but now you're like, well, let's see what he wants. Let me just think about it. All right. So anyway, the thing is that you got to take notes from the producers, right? I think that while it's true that the director represents the creative side of the project and the producer represents the business side, both of them have a real impetus to make sure that the film is just successful overall in every aspect possible. Reviews, audience reception, box office, awards, particularly a film like Blade Runner 2049. So you can't say, hey, I handled my end of the situation, because if it doesn't work out, that's a problem. Now, I want to take a side note here, because you did say Denis Villeneuve delivered creatively. I don't believe that's the case. Yes, the movie got good reviews, but the audience did not respond. A lot of people walked out of the movie. The word of mouth on Blade Runner 2049 was horrible. It's not like it got slow out of the gate and had amazing staying power. So that's really important to realize. It's not like people are like, there's no big cross. I mean, there are a couple of people who are like Philistines to everyone who didn't see Blade Runner 2049, but for the most part, people are like, yeah, that movie was slow and boring and missed the mark. And so I think Denis Villeneuve did not deliver creatively. So that's something to remember. All right. So as for Denis Villeneuve, he has a responsibility to take the producer's notes, and he has to think about the box office and the audience perception, the mainstream audience perception. When you're making a movie that costs that much money, it has to connect with the mainstream. If you're making a little art house movie, don't worry about it. But if you're making a big film that needs to make, as they said, 400 million worldwide at least, for Alcon not to go out of business. I mean, and now it looks like Blade Runner's not even going to hit 100 million domestically. You got to make sure that you're doing that. And if you don't have the ability to do that, well, then that's where you have to lean on your producer. Jordan Peele and Taika Waititi are two recent examples of directors who did a fantastic job with both the business and creative aspects of their movie and are reaping tremendous rewards as a result, business-wise. So that's really, really important. So I think that, yes, directors and producers should both care. It's a balancing act. One has a little bit more responsibility for their area than the other, but they have to keep reminding each other. They have to keep pushing and pulling, and they both have to respect. And at the end of the day, they both, they're both going to lose significantly if the film does not do well. And also, don't ever forget that Hollywood is a business. And so no matter how good Denis Villeneuve's work might be creatively, if he goes and he puts a company out of business, a producing company out of business, who's going to hire him to at least do any more blockbusters? You might be like, hey, Denis, I love your work, man, but no one will pay to see it, so I just can't hire you. It's a lot like some of the actors we've been discussing recently, right? Like Michael Fassbender. Oh, Michael Fassbender, you're so talented, but no one will pay to see you. I can't hire you. Ryan Gosling, I think, is having a similar situation, partially because of Blade Runner 2049. Jared Leto, I think, would give me pause at this point. So that's just something also that you have to remember. You have to be able to make the money, no matter who you are. All right, so anyway, I hope that clarifies things for you a little bit better. Thank you so much for your great question. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories. I am unknown, period. Viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.